This is the first video for the Population Dynamics unit. In this unit, we're discussing how biotic and abiotic factors, or other living organisms and environmental factors, influence the populations of organisms. This first video will look at how we talk about population distribution and how we sample that population to get some numbers. So you already know that a population is all the individuals of a particular species in an ecosystem. And ecosystems can be very small or very large depending upon what we are studying. So the population size is the number of those individuals in that population. But what's probably more important is the density, which is the number of the individuals in a particular geographic area. So it gives you a sense of how they're spread out, how thick they're crowded together, or how much space is in between individuals. Depending upon what we're studying and how big this area is, we measure the area in various units. So it can be something very small, like a square centimeter, or something that's very large, like a square mile. We often actually start with the population density and then go and work backwards to estimate the population size, because population density can be calculated in very small areas and then multiplied out to expand for the larger population size. Here's an example of some population density for deer. This is taken by the deer that have been killed during the hunting season, so it's by the deer harvested. And if you look over here in this last column, it tells you that it's the deer per square mile density that's calculated by how many bucks and does have been killed in a particular, reported as being killed during hunting season in a particular county. So in Bamberg County, for example, we had over 8,000 deer, and that works out to a density of 27.2 deer per square mile. And then this number would be used to calculate, to estimate, to infer how many deer there must be in the total county in order to get this many deer during hunting season. So the size of a population and its growth rate, how fast it is changing in the size, is often used as a measure of population health. So if a population is healthy, it is of a good size, and it is growing, it is having enough resources to have more members of the population being added every year. Small populations are a particular concern because they can be at risk of going extinct. And so I have three animals that are on the endangered species list that really may not be around very much longer because their population numbers are so very small. The Florida panther, our first example here, has approximately 100 individuals left. So there's not very many breeding pairs left out of those 100 individuals. A major crisis, environmental change, could cause the loss of that species completely. The Mississippi gopher frog is in equally dire strait with, again, about 100 individuals spread out over 3 ponds in a particular region of Mississippi. So if those ponds dry up, or if new housing developments come in and the ponds are contaminated with runoff, the Mississippi gopher frog will not be able to survive. And then this small fish, the white river spine dace, there's only about 50 individuals found at the last time it was counted in one lake in Nevada, so probably that species is not going to be around that much longer. In order to get an idea of the population size, we have to sample them. And we sample them because it is just too difficult to count every single individual, so we take a small portion, a sample of the population, and use that to estimate by multiplication how many members of that population, how many individuals are in that population. So there are 4 sampling methods that I want to talk about. The first one is called quadrats. And this particular sampling method, you would count the species within some randomly defined area. It's usually done using a frame, like you see over here in the illustration, and this frame is placed randomly across an area that is going to be sampled, And then inside the frame, any of the individuals that are part of the population you're considering are counted. Now, this obviously works best for things that are not going to run away. So it is used especially for counting plants because they stay put. Or if you're going to be counting something, give an example here of sea turtle eggs, and so that this would be, you could sample down into the sand with a certain size container so that you get just the same amount of sand being sampled every time for something like eggs of sea turtles or eggs of horseshoe crabs. Then, as I said, this would be used to get a population density for your sample area and then expand it out to see what the total population is predicted to be. Another method is known as the mark and recapture method. In this case, you first capture a certain number of individuals and tag or color or tattoo or put a collar on them, and then release them back into the wild. And then you repeat the capturing and count how many of those that you captured the second time are ones that you have marked, and use that as a way to then estimate the total population. We will be practicing this technique in class to get a better idea of it, but some of the ways that we do mark animals, we have bird bands, of course, on their legs. We have a little insect here that has a little bit of paint put on its back, and then, of course, the collars that are put on various animals. And so these are all part of the mark and recapture method, or of course with some of the collars you've got radio signals and you can follow what's happening with that animal by having the radio signals tracked. The third method is distance sampling. So you're observing and counting individuals from a stationary point on land or out in the water if you're counting things that are on the water, or by air. So these two pictures here, which are both of a particular kind of sheep in the Rocky Mountains on the cliffs here, and then this obviously is from a plane looking down, is a way of doing distance sampling. And then finally, you can sample things using camera traps, where a camera is being activated by a motion sensor or by an infrared sensor, which picks up the heat of the animal going by to get a photographic record. And so we have a picture here of a buck being caught at night by a camera that is set up. So these are 4 methods for sampling, for counting individuals in a smaller defined area, and then using that to calculate the density in that smaller area, and then to estimate the density, or estimate the total population, in a larger area. Populations then are distributed over a larger area, but they have different distribution or dispersal patterns. They are not all distributed the same way. So the 3 main ways that we talk about how populations are distributed, or how the organisms that we are talking about are spread out. We can say they are clumped together or they're aggregated together. And so this is when you have a group. When you have a herd of cows would be a clumped distribution of that population. A uniform distribution is when there's fairly even distribution across an area. When people plant trees for, Christmas, say they have a Christmas tree farm, you have very even distribution because the trees would be planted in nice even rows. But this also can happen naturally in different portions of an organism's life cycle. And then there's the random distribution where you've got no particular pattern. You can't really tie the way that the organisms are distributed down to anything in particular. So these different distribution patterns can be affected by where the organism is in its life cycle and what the environmental conditions are that are affecting how that organism wants to or has to survive. So here's some illustrations to kind of give an example of it. I don't know that this picture of the penguins is the best example of uniform. Probably you can just kind of look at this illustration here where it's drawn in as a diagram. But when birds of many types, a better picture would probably be of a nesting site. When birds are sitting on eggs, they will tend to distribute themselves in a uniform pattern where there's sort of, especially when you have a large group of, like a large group of penguins all on nests, or you see large groups of seabirds on the coast, then nests will all be spread apart about the same distance from each other, and it does come out being a pretty uniform distribution pattern. And the second one, random, like the dandelions here in this field. It's wherever that dandelion seed had been blown by the wind and then was able to get a root into the soil and grow. So that's particularly random. It's a little clumped on one side, but we've got just these individuals over here, so you can't say there's a particular pattern. And then the last one, we've got a herd of elephants. We've got definitely a clumped group of animals. They are all very close together and tend to stick together and move as a unit. Populations also can migrate in and out of ecosystems, and so that's going to change your population size and your population density as well. Some examples of animals that are migrating here in South Carolina. We've got our Canada geese, which we see traveling in spring and fall. Some of them certainly do stick around and stay here in the warmer weather months, and since it's been so warm, maybe even stick around here in the wintertime, but they do migrate across. We see them flying across the sky. Mourning doves are something that migrate through, heading north for the summer and then passing through for the south in the winter. So they're just passing through birds. We do hear them. They have a very mournful cry, a very sad cry. It's one I grew up with. Living in New York as a child, I heard these birds all the time in the summer. This bright orange beak is the American oystercatcher, one of the shore birds that migrates through here. And then some other animals that are not birds. The loggerhead sea turtle can be found along the east coast, and it again migrates typically more north for the feeding grounds in the summer. They will lay eggs in South Carolina and South Carolina beaches. And we have the northern right whales, which also do the same thing. Head more to the north in the summer because of feeding and then travel more to the south. So that gives you an overview of some of the key points on population dynamics for population distribution and population size. And we'll be working with these ideas in our activities over the next couple days, trying to help you get a better sense of how scientists can use this information as they study populations.